Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Kenya is reeling under a devastating deluge. Floods triggered by heavy rain have ravaged the country and have claimed over 250 lives so far, while nearly 55,000 households have been displaced. Now, Kenya's President William Ruto has declared a public holiday on Friday to mourn the deaths of flood victims. This as torrential rain that started in April has turned the streets of Kenya into rivers and submerged houses in several parts of the East African nation. Rescue workers were forced to airlift the stranded citizens in some places.
The water came and I felt as if something was falling. That's when the water swept us with my wife and child. I got stuck and was drenched in mud. I got up and started looking for my child. The baby had cried for a while, but I could not find them. There was nothing I could have done.
Kenya also delayed the reopening of schools by 2 weeks until this coming Monday, as government data states that floods have damaged at least 1,000 schools across the country. The country's misery doesn't end here. Weeks of destructive rain and floods have led to a surge in cholera cases across the country. The eastern part of the flood-hit nation has reported 44 cases of cholera, which is an intestinal infection that spreads through contaminated food and water. However, Kenya is not the only East African country battered by floods. In Tanzania, heavier than usual rain triggered floods and landslides that killed at least 155 people. Strong winds caused due to the Cyclone Hidaya also battered Tanzania and led to a blackout in most parts. The floods have forced at least 400 people to live in Tanzania's rescue centers.
We all agreed not to go, but there are some who are stubborn. So at times when we get there, we get problems. Some die, and things like that. So many have not gone out today.
In Tanzania's neighbouring nation, Burundi, people in the capital city of Bujumbura were forced to use canoes as roads were submerged underwater. Now, the floods in Burundi have killed at least 29 people.
The flooding forced me to move out. The water has been rising here. We are a family of 10, and there are children as well who are in school. I am also a student. We often get late for class. When we moved here, we never imagined the waters could ever reach this level. But it kept rising, so we decided to move out.
Floods have ravaged several parts of East Africa. The affected countries also include Rwanda, Somalia, and Ethiopia. Now, according to a UN report, the deluge has affected over 630,000 people across the region, and over 230,000 were displaced in the last 5 days. The rainfall in East Africa has been amplified by the El Niño weather pattern. It is a naturally occurring climate phenomenon that is typically associated with increased heat worldwide. It leads to drought in some parts of the world and heavy downpours elsewhere. Now, for more on this, we have with us Mark Bichachi, a senior journalist from Nairobi. Thank you very much for being with us. Now, the floods in Kenya have been devastating, claiming the lives of at least 250 people so far from this disaster. Take us through the situation in Kenya right now.
Well, the situation in Kenya is one where the infrastructure to begin with has largely been destroyed, both within the capital city of Nairobi and other towns, cutting off entire communities from supplies of food that they depend on. At the same time, we've seen over 200 people who've lost their lives, with dozens missing as well, together with 223,000 people affected by these floods. The waters are presently receding, given that the rainfall has significantly reduced. However, because of the amount of landslides and the amount of debris that has affected many places, rescue efforts are still ongoing, although the hopes of finding individuals alive within those particular areas is dwindling by the day. At the same time, this has affected largely our schooling situation, where many schools have remained closed, especially boarding schools. Then we've got the issue of cholera that you mentioned there in your report, and this is due to the fact that many of the citizens of this country use what are called pit latrines, which are simply holes dug into the ground. And when it floods, then you can imagine that the water carries out the refuse that is in those particular pits. And then that causes disease. Also, these floods have cut out some water supply in some areas. So it is a situation that is going to take Kenya a while to recover from. There's a lot to be done in terms of bringing aid to people, with thousands living in aid camps, and also other thousands requiring emergency aid. At the same time, the government has put aside about $4 million to be able to support flood victims. Those are about 10,000 families that are expected to be targeted. At the same time, the government is receiving pledges of aid from the United States, from the UAE through Dubai, and many other countries which are standing strong with the Republic of Kenya.
Right. Now, Kenya isn't the only East African nation to be affected. Other eastern parts of the continent also struggling with this unusually high rainfall, and this is being attributed to the El Nino and also to climate change. What are your thoughts?
Well, first and foremost, this is probably the third time I have seen El Nino effects in this country. And I can tell you from personal experience and also from records that this is the most devastating El Nino has ever been in this country, with many more deaths, many more landslides. So this is not just about El Nino. And remember, there was also some flooding last year in October 2023. So this is definitely exasperated by global warming. It is exasperated by the fact that this country, for example, has not had reports of a cyclone doing landfall in this country in much of our history. Therefore, the situation in Kenya is definitely exasperated by climate change, and it is unfairly affected by this. And unfortunately, the areas also that are affected are also unduly affecting those who are poorer in this country. We have seen very few reports of the wealthy being affected as much as those who live in makeshift buildings across the city of Nairobi being affected and being needed to be rescued.
Right. Now, Mark, Africa is responsible for less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, while the richest 10% of the world's population are responsible for over half of the carbon emissions. Yet Africa is the most vulnerable to climate change and is being hit the hardest by its effects. Do you think that the responsibility should lie mostly with the world's richest and that they must act for Africa?
Well, that is definitely for sure. In fact, the question is also, just to extend your question, is also the question of the West and Asian tigers burnt fossil fuels in order to develop, and yet they're hamstringing Africa from doing the same. So it is one, they succeeded by damaging Africa by all intents and purposes, and now hamstringing Africa to meet goals of global climate change goals, while at the same time not allowing Africa to develop, while allowing Africa to suffer. Now, there are programs, for example, the carbon credit program, that they're trying to push so that Africa is recompensed by keeping up its forests and keeping up planting trees. But this by no means is not going to be enough, because by estimate, Kenya has today looked at a loss of over almost $1 billion worth of damage across the country. Now, this $1 billion is not going to be covered by carbon credits. It's not going to be covered by the donations that we are receiving from the West. And the West and the East, for that matter, are not going to come and develop our countries for free. So definitely, Africa needs to get back to the negotiation table and say, listen, we are most affected. We have not developed. We, for example, Kenya gets more than 80% of its electricity through renewable resources from wind, solar, and geothermal sources. It is not a large-scale contributor to global warming. Yet today, it is suffering significantly because of such effects. So Africa needs to get back to the table. It needs to demand that it is compensated for the damage that it is incurring because of the actions of the West up to 200 years back. But at the same time, we must be pragmatic and remember, Africa has been talking about reparations for decades now. It has never happened. Why? Because Africa still goes to the West with its begging bowl and asking to be helped instead of standing on its own 2 feet and demanding that it is treated fairly and equitably according to what it has gone through historically and currently.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on First Post Africa and for all your valued insights.
You're most welcome.
First Post reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on First Post.